It's so sad that the boys are not friends. I cooked for them as young boys. Now, I don't know what's gone on. I'm really glad Princess Diana's not here to see it.
So I don't know how staying silent.
For months, the palace believed the most dangerous conversation had remained sealed behind closed doors. But when fragments of William's private warning suddenly surfaced, an old royal conflict returned with devastating force, and Meghan's carefully protected public image began facing questions no polished statement could easily silence. The warning had allegedly been delivered during one of the most fragile periods in the relationship between Harry, Meghan, and the royal household. It was not prepared as an official statement. It was not meant for reporters, commentators, or the millions watching the family's every move. According to those who understood the tension surrounding it, the message had been shared within an extremely small circle people trusted to protect the monarchy's most private disputes from becoming public ammunition. Then, something changed. The moment senior aides realized that pieces of William's words may have escaped, the mood inside the palace reportedly hardened. This was no ordinary rumor that could be ignored until the news cycle moved on. The leak threatened to reveal how deeply William had worried about the direction of the conflict and how far he believed the consequences could reach. His concern was allegedly bigger than Meghan's behavior in one argument or one interview. William feared that private relationships within the family were being turned into leverage, with emotional conversations becoming pressure points in a much wider struggle over sympathy, access, and influence. Every personal disagreement carried the risk of becoming part of a public narrative. Every attempt at reconciliation could later be retold as evidence against the palace. Meghan, at least publicly, remained calm. There was no immediate explosion, no rushed denial, and no emotional response that could confirm the story. But around her, the questions became harder to contain. Who had released the warning? Why had it emerged now? And what did the timing suggest about the battle still taking place behind closed doors? Harry was trapped in the middle. His instinct was to defend his wife against what he saw as another carefully timed attack. Yet he could not completely ignore the possibility that William had predicted exactly what was now happening. The private warning itself had become public, proving how little trust remained between the brothers. And there was something even more troubling hidden beneath the leaked fragments. William's message was not simply criticism. It appeared to point toward a specific decision Meghan was allegedly preparing to make, one that could reopen questions about royal access, public status, and her future connection to the crown. Inside the monarchy, warnings are rarely spoken as direct threats. They are delivered through careful language about protection, invitations, privilege, and what may disappear if certain boundaries are crossed. The palace could survive scandal. What it feared most was losing control over when secrets emerged, who shaped them, and whose version reached the public first. Now that control was slipping, and the leak was beginning to expose a deeper struggle involving loyalty, family history, status, and Meghan's uncertain place outside the institution. But to understand why William's words were considered so dangerous, the story must return to the moment he first became convinced that Meghan's royal ambitions had not ended when she left Britain. William had remained publicly disciplined, refusing to answer every accusation or emotional interview. Yet behind palace doors, his silence was not indifference. According to the leaked account, he had been watching a pattern develop, one that convinced him Meghan's departure had not ended the struggle for royal influence. From William's perspective, a troubling contradiction had begun to grow. Meghan and Harry spoke about freedom, independence, and escaping the limits of palace life. Yet their public identity remained closely tied to royal titles, historic ceremonies, family connections, and the powerful status that came from the crown. They had stepped away from royal duty, but the royal connection still followed every appearance, interview, and announcement. That contradiction reportedly unsettled William. He feared that the monarchy's private traditions were no longer being treated as sacred family matters. Instead, painful conversations, old customs, and personal disagreements could be reshaped into emotional stories for a worldwide audience. What the palace viewed as confidential history could become public influence in a matter of moments. His concern soon became personal. William grew increasingly protective of Catherine, their children, and the future reputation of the institution they would one day represent. He could tolerate criticism aimed at himself, but he was less willing to accept situations that might pull his family into another cycle of accusation, reaction, and carefully managed reconciliation. Behind closed doors, the questions became more serious. Would Meghan be invited to future ceremonies? Could she stay at a royal residence? Would security be provided? Would a public welcome suggest that earlier conflicts had been forgotten? These were not small details. Every invitation could become a precedent. Every photograph could carry political meaning. Every exception could create a new expectation. William was no longer thinking only as Harry's brother. He was thinking as the future king, responsible for decisions that might shape the monarchy long after the present crisis had passed. Senior advisors allegedly discussed whether Meghan's renewed involvement could reopen wounds the palace had barely contained. Harry, however, reportedly saw William's caution very differently. To him, it looked like hostility disguised as duty, a deliberate effort to keep Meghan outside the family while protecting the palace from embarrassment. That reaction carried years of pain. William and Harry had shared grief, loyalty, competition, and resentment. They had once protected each other from the pressures surrounding them. Now every disagreement seemed to confirm their worst fears about one another. William allegedly believed Meghan understood the power of royal association better than anyone. Even while criticizing palace life, she could still draw strength from its titles, history, and global fascination. And when one particular proposal reached the palace, one involving renewed access without a full return to royal restrictions, William reportedly decided that silence was no longer enough. He would draw a boundary, not a gentle one, not a temporary one, a boundary so severe that Harry would immediately understand how much was now at risk. That boundary would soon become the heart of the leaked warning, but before William delivered it, Meghan was allegedly preparing a move that palace insiders believed could change everything. Behind the public smiles and carefully chosen words, a quieter plan was allegedly taking shape. Meghan was said to be exploring a path back into royal relevance without surrendering her independence, but the palace saw something far more dangerous, a return designed on her terms, under her control. The idea was subtle. Meghan would not return as a working royal bound by the old system, but she could appear at selected family occasions, historic ceremonies, or carefully chosen moments of reconciliation. She would regain the powerful glow of royal visibility while keeping control over what she said, how she appeared, and how the story was presented afterward. To Meghan, it may have seemed like balance. To the palace, it looked like influence without obligation. Rather than approaching William or Catherine directly, private messages were allegedly carried through trusted intermediaries. Each conversation remained informal enough to deny, yet serious enough to test whether the royal door was still open. Meghan reportedly believed the public desire for peace had created leverage. If the palace rejected her, it risked looking cruel. If it welcomed her, she could return without surrendering the independence she had fought to protect. Harry was said to support the idea for deeply personal reasons. He feared that continued distance would leave his children disconnected from their royal heritage. Every missed ceremony and family gathering appeared to push them further away from a history that still belonged to them by birth. He wanted a bridge before exclusion became permanent. But palace officials saw danger in even a temporary compromise. a single invitation might become an expectation. One appearance could lead to demands for another. Soon, every decision would be judged against the first exception. The disputes went far beyond attendance. Would Meghan use her title formally? Would she stand in a ceremonial position or remain a private guest? Could she appear in official family photographs? Who would provide security, accommodation, and access? Each detail carried a message, and every message could be interpreted as approval. Meghan allegedly believed Charles remained emotionally reachable. Whatever William's objections, the king's affection for Harry might still create a path forward. That possibility alarmed William. He feared his father's guilt, and love could be used to move around boundaries designed to protect the wider institution. As rumors of the proposed return began circulating within the royal circle, aides prepared for the worst possibility, the plan becoming public before the palace had agreed to anything. Once the story escaped, refusal could be portrayed as rejection, while hesitation could look like negotiation. William saw the pressure building. He decided Harry had to understand exactly what was at stake before Meghan's strategy advanced any further. The warning was delivered privately, without cameras, announcements, or room for misunderstanding. And when William finally spoke, his message was not the emotional appeal Harry expected. It was a cold declaration about what Meghan risked losing if she pushed the palace again. The leaked warning was far more severe than anyone expected. William had allegedly told Harry that Meghan could not demand royal recognition while publicly challenging the institution, and if she attempted to force her way back through pressure, publicity, or private influence, the palace would close ranks completely. William's message was direct. Meghan's future relationship with the royal family, he allegedly warned, would depend on whether she respected the boundaries already placed before her. Those limits were not open to public negotiation. They could not be tested through headlines, emotional appeals, or private conversations that later appeared in carefully shaped accounts. To William, the contradiction had become impossible to ignore. Meghan could not repeatedly condemn palace culture while still seeking the prestige, protection, ceremonial access, and global attention attached to it. She could not reject the institution's control, then expect its most valuable privileges to remain available whenever they served her interests. Any attempted return driven by media pressure would be viewed as manipulation. Any interview designed to create sympathy before private discussions had concluded would harden resistance. And any strategically placed leak could destroy what little trust remained. Then came the boundary Harry found most personal. William allegedly insisted that Catherine and the Wales children would not be placed inside staged moments of reconciliation. They would not be used to create photographs suggesting peace while serious tensions remained unresolved behind closed doors. Their presence, he argued, could not become a symbol arranged to repair Meghan's public standing. The warning became harsher still. If the pressure continued, Meghan could face a future with no formal royal role, no privileged position at ceremonies, and no guarantee of invitations to important family occasions. Nothing would be promised simply because public interest demanded a reunion. Harry reportedly reacted with fury. He accused William of punishing Meghan, turning protocol into a weapon, and using his future authority to decide who belonged. What William described as protection, Harry saw as control. What one brother called duty, the other experienced as betrayal. But William refused to retreat. The monarchy, he allegedly argued, could survive criticism. It could survive hostile headlines and public anger. What it could not survive was rewriting its rules each time one family member applied enough pressure. He also delivered a devastating warning about trust. Private conversations could no longer remain open if they repeatedly returned as public narratives. Every leaked detail made the next honest discussion less likely. That was the cruelty at the heart of the confrontation. Two brothers once united by grief were now arguing over whether one brother's wife had become a danger to the family they had both spent their lives trying to understand. When the warning leaked, it changed the entire story. Palace resistance no longer appeared sudden. It looked like the final response to a pattern William believed he had recognized long before. But the leak created another mystery. Had someone loyal to William released it to defend him? Had someone close to Harry exposed it to make William appear ruthless? Or had a third figure decided reconciliation must be destroyed? For Meghan, the damage was immediate. The narrative shifted from palace cruelty to repeated warnings allegedly ignored. Her strategy began to fracture as people asked whether William's darkest concerns had already come true. Yet the warning itself was only the beginning, because the leak also exposed the decision Meghan allegedly made after hearing it, and that decision left even Harry struggling to defend what came next. Meghan had been given a choice: step back from the confrontation or prove William's darkest suspicion correct. What happened next would transform a private family dispute into a palace crisis, because instead of retreating, she allegedly began shaping a new narrative, one designed to place William under pressure. To Meghan, William's warning did not sound like a temporary boundary. It sounded like a declaration that he intended to control her royal future permanently. Every condition, every restriction, and every reference to protocol seemed to carry the same message. William would decide when she could return, how she would be received, and whether she would ever be allowed close to the center of royal life again. Remaining silent, she allegedly believed, would allow the palace to define everything. Her absence could be presented as guilt. Her refusal to respond could be treated as acceptance. And once William's version hardened into the accepted story, reclaiming public sympathy would become far more difficult. Soon, indirect messages began appearing around the conflict. They emphasized exclusion, unequal treatment, security fears, and Harry's growing separation from his family. Nothing seemed direct enough to confirm a coordinated response, yet the themes were unmistakable. Meghan was no longer being portrayed simply as a former working royal seeking access. She was becoming the woman allegedly kept outside by a future king determined to protect his power. She reportedly believed public sympathy could reach Charles in a way private arguments could not. If enough people questioned William's severity, the king might feel compelled to intervene. But that placed Harry in the most painful position of all. He became both messenger and shield, carrying Meghan's concerns toward the palace while absorbing William's frustration in return. William watched the very subjects raised in his private warning begin surfacing in wider conversations. Security, invitations, family division, royal access. To him, this looked like confirmation that private negotiations were once again being transformed into public pressure. Palace officials allegedly reached the same conclusion. The warning had not created the crisis, they believed. It had predicted it. Meghan, however, reportedly saw hypocrisy. Other royals had received flexibility, forgiveness, and private protection. Why were traditions suddenly treated as unbreakable when she asked for accommodation? William's answer was equally firm. Those who received royal privileges also accepted royal obligations. Meghan, he believed, wanted exceptions without returning to the discipline, silence, and restrictions expected of working members of the family. The confrontation finally centered on a proposed family occasion. Meghan's attendance could have signaled peace, but William refused to let it become a stage for manufactured reconciliation. Strict conditions would have to be accepted. No controlled publicity. No symbolic positioning. No suggestion that one appearance restored her former standing. Harry was now almost completely isolated. Supporting Meghan meant challenging William. Seeking peace with William risked appearing to abandon his wife. The leak may have exposed Meghan's strategy, but it also revealed Harry's emotional imprisonment between two loyalties demanding total devotion. And as the pressure intensified, Charles was forced to ask whether neutrality was preserving his family, or quietly destroying what remained of it. The crisis had now moved beyond William and Meghan, forcing King Charles to confront the decision he had spent years avoiding, whether protecting Harry meant overruling the future king. Charles had always hoped time would soften the conflict, but the leaked warning destroyed that illusion. With William demanding institutional protection and Harry demanding fairness for Meghan, the king faced an impossible choice: defend the son who left, or support the son who would inherit the crown. For Charles, the crisis was no longer something he could delay with silence, private affection, or vague promises of reconciliation. As a father, he feared losing Harry completely. As king, he understood that weakening William's position could damage the authority of the man expected to carry the monarchy into its next era. William allegedly made that danger clear. Boundaries meant nothing, he argued, if Charles repeatedly softened them out of guilt. Every private exception risked becoming a public expectation, and every reversal could make William appear powerless before he had even inherited the crown. Yet Charles could not easily dismiss Harry's pain. He reportedly carried deep regret over his younger son's unhappiness and feared that continued distance might cut him off from Harry's children as well. The possibility of losing that relationship permanently weighed heavily on him. Camilla was said to view the situation more cautiously. In her eyes, each concession created fresh risk. A private gesture could become another headline. A family invitation could be interpreted as a royal restoration. What Charles hoped would create peace might simply provide the opening for another public conflict. Palace advisors warned that the dispute had moved beyond emotion. It was now shaping expectations about future access, invitations, protection, and status. Whatever Charles allowed today could become the standard William would later be expected to follow. One possible compromise emerged. Harry could be offered private contact with his father and family, while Meghan remained outside formal royal involvement. It was meant to preserve the personal bond without reopening institutional doors. Harry reportedly rejected the idea immediately. To him, any arrangement that separated him from Meghan treated her as the cause of everything. The message seemed painfully clear. His family wanted him back, but only if he returned without the woman he had chosen to protect. William interpreted that response differently. He saw it as proof that Harry would place Meghan's demands above royal stability, even when a private path toward reconciliation remained available. The matter was finally tested during a confidential royal meeting. Charles listened to both sides, but refused to overturn William's boundary. There was no public punishment and no dramatic announcement. Yet the meaning was unmistakable. Meghan's route back into royal life had become narrower than ever. That decision also raised a darker possibility. Perhaps the person behind the leak already knew Charles had allowed William's warning to stand. By exposing it publicly, the source may have ensured that the king could never quietly reverse course without appearing weak. But as Charles allowed William's boundary to remain, attention shifted toward the most dangerous unanswered question of all: who inside the royal circle wanted this private confrontation exposed? Someone had broken the palace's most sacred rule. Private family warnings were never meant to become public weapons. Yet the timing of this leak appeared almost surgical, arriving when Meghan's position was most vulnerable and suggesting that the real battle was not only between royals, but among the people surrounding them. Three possibilities immediately emerged, and each pointed toward a different betrayal. The first was someone fiercely loyal to William. By releasing the warning, that person could show that he had not acted suddenly or without reason. He had allegedly tried to stop the crisis in private, only to see his fears unfold exactly as predicted. The second possibility was far more dangerous. Someone close to Harry may have wanted William's words exposed to make him appear cold, controlling, and determined to keep Meghan outside the family. If the public heard only the severity of the warning, William could be portrayed not as a protector of the crown, but as a future king using royal power against his own brother. Then came the darkest theory. The leak may have come from an intermediary who had helped carry messages during Meghan's proposed return. Someone who no longer wanted reconciliation to succeed. Such a person would gain nothing from peace. Their purpose would be chaos, forcing both sides into positions too public and painful to reverse. Inside the palace, aides reportedly began tracing who had known what. Who had heard the original conversation? Who had seen written summaries, private correspondence, or second-hand accounts? The search only deepened suspicion. Members of both households started limiting what they shared, even with advisors who had served them for years. Meghan allegedly believed the timing was deliberate. The warning surfaced just as her credibility mattered most, making the leak feel less like disclosure and more like calculated humiliation. William's camp had fears of its own. If one part of the conversation had escaped, Harry's furious response and Meghan's alleged strategy might follow. Harry was enraged that strangers were now judging a private confrontation without hearing his complete account. Yet the damage had already spread in every direction. Meghan appeared repeatedly warned. William appeared ruthless. Harry looked trapped between loyalty and anger. Charles seemed unable to control his own family. That raised one chilling possibility. Perhaps the source did not care who won. Perhaps the objective was simply to make reconciliation impossible. And there was still one detail missing. Those familiar with the leaked fragments suggested William's message contained a final reference to what would happen after Charles's reign. It concerned Harry and Meghan's future royal connection when the father, still protecting a fragile bridge, was no longer king. That hidden clause explained why the warning caused such fear. The argument was not merely about an invitation or one disputed return. It was about who would control the door to the monarchy in the years ahead, and whether that door might eventually close forever. And when the final meaning of William's warning became clear, Meghan and Harry were forced to confront a future they had avoided imagining, a monarchy in which Charles could no longer protect them. William's warning was never only about the present. It was about the day the crown would pass to him, and the protections, invitations, and emotional exceptions Harry still received through Charles could disappear. For Meghan, the leak exposed a terrifying reality. Time was no longer working in her favor. The deepest meaning of William's message was not hidden in one ceremony or one failed attempt at peace. It concerned the future balance of power. As long as Charles remained on the throne, Harry still had a father inside the institution, a man carrying affection and the hope that some bridge could survive. That connection was fragile, but it existed. William offered no such guarantee. He allegedly believed that repeated exceptions had already weakened trust. When the crown eventually passed to him, he might feel no duty to preserve privileges that had become sources of conflict. Invitations could become rarer. Access to royal residences could tighten. Security support might be judged more strictly. Ceremonial positions, private communication, and family contact could be separated from royal inclusion. For Meghan, that possibility changed everything. Repairing relations with Charles alone would not secure her family's future. The power to open or close royal doors would eventually move elsewhere. And William would not stand alone. Catherine's influence would grow beside his, making Meghan's strained relationship with her impossible to dismiss. The future monarchy would belong to the couple Harry and Meghan had come to distrust most deeply. Harry now faced the brutal consequence of years spent attacking or doubting the brother who might one day control his remaining access to royal life. Their childhood bond, once shaped by grief and protection, could fail to recover before succession transformed a family wound into institutional reality. Perhaps William's warning had been one final chance, not an act of forgiveness, but an opportunity to rebuild trust before the door became harder to reopen. Meghan, however, allegedly refused to accept that William should determine her children's connection to their heritage or define her family's royal identity. To her, that authority felt less like tradition and more like permanent control. Behind palace doors, preparations were shifting toward a future where private reconciliation and official inclusion would be treated separately. Harry might remain a son and brother without regaining status. Meghan might receive courtesy without access. That was the leak's most damaging revelation. She was not exposed by one decision alone, but by the claim that the consequences had been explained in advance. Now the question was whether Meghan and Harry would retreat, negotiate quietly, or answer with a more aggressive public campaign. William's warning was visible. His final decision was not. Because the warning may have leaked, but the final royal decision has not, and when that decision eventually emerges, it could permanently redefine Meghan, Harry, and their place in the history of the British monarchy.